Hi, this is Jaxler, and this is going to be a guide and overview of the practice tool mod that Monster860 created. So I'm hopped into the game right now with the hack pack on, and I'm going to be going over all the features that this has to offer in order and show you all how to use them. Alright, so first things first, to access the hack menu, all you need to do is be in game and not in the cutscene and such, and you just hit the select menu. And then if you follow the install guide correctly, you should see the hack menu pop up here. And then you'll see a list of different options right here. And then you can either just press the cancel button right here or just press triangle to exit the menu if you don't need to do anything in here. Okay, so we're going to go through all of these features in a set order. There are a couple of small, I will mention this in advance. Monster programmed a couple of Easter eggs in the pack where he makes a text box appear if you do a certain thing. I don't remember what all of those are, but if you see a weird text box that normally isn't there in game, that's why. The most important one and the most useful one is that when we get further into the tutorial, we're going to be doing a glitch known as ledge flying, and if you perform the glitch in the incorrect way or in the wrong direction, you can occasionally crash the game if you do it a specific way. And one of the things that this practice mod has is protection against that crash, where it brings up a text box before the game would normally crash. So this is a really great way to practice that technique without having to restart your console over and over if you screw something up. This is especially useful in Act 4, and I'll point that out once we get there to in the tutorial, because that's a very easy way to crash the game with a ledge fly. But we'll get more into that when we actually get into the full tutorial, obviously. But let's take a look at the hack menu here. So the first thing, and probably one of the most useful things about the hack pack, is this load area functionality. Now what this does is, you'll see that it looks kind of weird and complicated, but don't worry about it. We've already mapped out a lot of this. So what this feature does is when you select a address for a location in this menu and press X, it will teleport you to that location, anywhere in the game. So you'll see an ID here and a type. So the type isn't super important. So outside of the fact that it can kind of help you determine if you put in the right number or not. If you see the red transition, that's generally not a good sign. There's also interiors and exteriors. Those generally refer to areas that you will actually want to warp to. But I'll kind of explain the difference between those two in a sec. So in order to make use of this tool, if you go to speedrun.com and go underneath resources, I'll have this linked in the video description, so don't worry too much about it if this is going over your head. But what you want to do is go to speedrun.com, and I believe underneath the resources tab, let me just double check, because I'm very good at tutorial making and I totally didn't forget to look at this in advance. It should be under resources, not guides. Yeah, so it's going to be under resources and underneath the tools tab, so at the very top of the screen. And it should be that game data spreadsheet. And what you'll want to do is, I'm already looking at it, you'll want to go to the first page of it where it says map list. I can actually try and show this on screen really quick. Hold on a second. I can do it. There we go. Okay. So, if you look at this spreadsheet, you'll see this thing that says index in the column D. That is the number that you want to use in order to determine where you warp. So, for example, if I go into the ID, if I enter the ID of 14, it'll take me to Bogshot Village when I press X. If I press 0x20, it'll take me to Brightvale Coast, for example. And so that's kind of the way that we use to sort of map out where all these different locations are. It's based on the way that they're sorted in the game's memory. So if you want to warp somewhere to practice, you go to the spreadsheet, you look up the index, and then you enter that in. And so the way that you enter that in is you can move between these two digits by going left and right on the D-pad, or I think you can use the stick too. I normally use the D-pad because it's a little more responsive. The 0x, don't worry about that. You can't actually change that, and it doesn't really matter. These 2 digits are what you're going to want to control in order to warp to somewhere. So let's go back to that Bogshot Village example. We're in Bogshot Swamp, which is not the same place as the village. So if I wanted to warp to the village, I would type in 14. So set this to 1 and then 4. So if you go up, it increases the number. If you go down, it decreases the number. And it will take you to Bogshot Village, just like this. Give it a second. You'll also notice that during the hack pack, all of the loading screens are in purple. That's one of the ways that we know whether or not you have the hack pack loaded or not. For anyone who's trying to sneak a run past us with the hack pack enabled, you're not allowed to have the hack pack running during your actual attempts. When you're practicing, it's totally fine. But we have ways built into the pack that allow us to detect that. It's not like, we're going to convict you of cheating. It's just we don't want people to use the hack pack when you're doing full runs because it's kind of unfair and it makes moderation difficult, right? But yeah, so you saw that I loaded into 0x14 or just 14, and it took me to here. Now, I could also go back to exactly where I was if I did like 16, for example. But pretty much every location in the game, has an address that you can warp to using this function. So one of the things, you might have already seen it, and I want to see if I can't pull up a good example. Okay, Abandoned Mines is a really great example. So when you're looking through like the list of like in that index column you saw in the spreadsheet, you may see like a number and a letter. Like you may see letters like from A to F in there. So you don't really need to know why that's the case, but some of the addresses use letters instead of numbers. So the way you can think about it is it goes from each. So if I go back into load area, each of these goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then it goes A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? And then you would go to 10. Alright? If you've heard of hexadecimal, that's what these numbers represent. So, for example, if you wanted to warp to the Abandoned Mines, which would be a really, might be a very helpful place if you want to practice the movement in there, you would warp to 3C. And so that's how you would warp to coordinates that are with those like letter characters in them. It just scrolls to them automatically for you, and you don't really have to worry about like typing anything in or anything like that. Before we move on to the next feature, there are a couple of interesting. There's one interesting place that I want to point out to you that might not be very apparent on here. I need to remember where this is located on the spreadsheet because it's been a little bit. So give me just one moment. I think it's in the 90s range. Yeah. Okay. So what I want to show you is the location that it warps you to when you type in 94. This will actually take you to there's 2 of them. So I'll show you both. So this one is 94. So depending on where you stand, it'll like show some entities in here and stuff, different characters. This is on disk and normally can't be accessed, but it's kind of interesting that I don't remember this crystal being here. Fascinating. I'll have to let people know about that. The big reason why I'm showing you this location, so again, that's the 94 is the location. Like the ID that you need to type in to get to this location. So the nice thing about this place is it has every weapon and shield. It doesn't have Roberta's like spells for shielding, but it has every one of Tor's swords, so it can be a really easy way of getting yourself a weapon really quickly for a fresh file if you're making practice saves or safety saves. What was I going to say? The reason I show you this, there is a way to give yourself items in this hack pack, but I find this to be a little bit less cumbersome than scrolling through the menu and looking for a specific sword. It shows you the visual so you know which one you're kind of picking up. So if you need specifically the Squire sword or the wooden sword to practice a fight, there you go. Cool. Okay, so the other one I wanted to show you real quick is 95. I want to show you this one because this is really nice for practicing certain glitches. So at 95 is a bunch of test geometry that was left in the game's code. And so this is like a really good spot to practice tricks that involve the Cloak of Heroes, which you'll see in a couple of spots later. So like, for example, if I wanted to practice mega jumping, which I'll teach you how to do in a little bit, this is a really nice open bit of space for you to run around and practice. There's also a bunch of ledges that you can grab, which you can use to affect your gravity, which I'll mention in a little bit here. So yeah, the ID for this area is 95. I personally have a save here at all times, so I don't even need to bother. But I'll show you how to set that up too. So yeah, that pretty much goes over loading different areas. Oh wait, so let me see if I can find an interior real quick for you. There we go. So the difference between exteriors and interiors is interiors are kind of these sub areas within the game. You won't really see this all that much when you're like practicing for any percent. But if you happen to warp into one of these, when you leave, it'll just put you back wherever map you were previously. So like if you're doing like an out of bounds or something somehow there, and you see some geometry that you're not used to there, that's probably why. That will matter to like exactly like 1 or 2 people, depending on their commitment to this game. But I just wanted to let you all know in advance what those interiors mean. Transitions are just kind of like sort of bits of geometry between areas, so loading them in via the hack pack isn't very useful. So that's why I didn't really bother to mention them. Okay, so that should pretty much cover loading areas. Next, let's go over the sort of the giving yourself stuff. So the major one you're going to be using is give item. So you can give yourself a bunch of quest-related items. Pretty much every item that you can pick up in the game, whether it's a key item or a consumable or a piece of equipment, is in this list. So you can see Illisen's Charms in here. There's a bunch of keys in here. You can scroll down individually by pressing down, or you can scroll down every 10 by hitting left or right on the D-pad. The nice thing about this menu is it's a really great way of getting consumables and setting up practice saves. So you can get like a boatload of potions of Mirka speed, which you will be doing in the run, but it can be nice to do this. So you can, again, select kind of like the same way you do. But if you hit left, you can go up to 4 digits to the left. So you can give yourself, hold on, 9,999 potions of Mirka speed. At a time. So you can stack up even more, but you can give yourself basically endless speed potions, or basically endless of any consumable. This is another way you can also use to get yourself like a specific weapon, if you know the name of it. The Cloak of Heroes is also in here. So if you're trying to set up a practice save and forgot the cloak, you can just give yourself the cloak. I believe it is under Tattered Cloak, so this 126. If you get the Tattered Cloak and give it to yourself, it'll give you the Cloak of Heroes in your inventory, which is used for a lot of glitches in this run. Okay, so that's pretty much all I want to cover with give item. Edit Neopoints is the same way, except I believe it just edits what your Neopoints is rather than giving you a set amount. So if I edit my Neopoint, you can like edit this ludicrously high. But if you only want to have like a specific amount, like if you're route testing, for example, if you go to, around this range right here, you can give yourself a specific amount of Neopoints. That really doesn't come up very often. So generally just editing your Neopoints count through the hack menu is the best way to go to get yourself money if you're route testing or something like that. Okay, edit flags is not something most people will use. This is a way for people like me, Monster, maybe like Charles, for example, to edit, like turn on and off different flags in the game's memory in order to test things. We don't use this all that much, and you will probably never use it. But I just wanted to mention what this was, just in case you were like tooling around. But you can kind of do some cool stuff with this, I guess. But we don't really use it all that much. Options. Okay. So debug mode. I don't really know what this does all that much. when you like reload an area and like you're in like certain spaces, like if you're in the Narfus fight, it can cause more information to display. But sometimes this can cause the game to crash or do some weird behavior, so I don't recommend enabling it, especially if you decide to turn on one of these other options. So suppress loads, it tells you what this does, but basically this allows you, this prevents loading zones from happening and working at all. So if you want to, you could use this to like get out of bounds. This would be like a really easy way to get out of bounds and practice movement if you don't want to like repetitively practice some of the speed tech to get out of bounds. I don't really use this, but this is something that you could end up finding useful. The last thing here, and probably the most important part about the options section here, is show coordinates. I'm going to turn this on, and we're going to go through everything that show coordinates does, because this information in here is very useful. So the first 3 numbers are your position within the game world. Okay, so that red coordinate, I believe, is your X coordinate. So like so if you imagine the world as like a 3D coordinate grid, the red is where you are relatively in the X direction. Green is where you are in the Y direction, so up and down. And then blue is where you are in the Z direction. So if X is left and right, then Z is forward and backward. Okay. So this will give you basically where you are positioned in the game at any time, which can be really useful for practice. This kind of tends to come up a bit more in like all bosses type stuff and some of the larger categories, especially once we like start. If you're like messing with like revive warps, that's a very helpful tool. It can also be kind of like just fun to like see how far you've gotten out of bounds and stuff, and can be helpful for certain setups if we're like communicating things like that. Below that, the Z value at SPD, that's your speed. So that's how fast you're moving. So if I'm just walking, that's going to be 6.76. It's going to go up to like 8 while I'm jumping. While I'm running, it's going to be like this. And then when I jump, I slow down. So you'll hear me mention this a little bit, but you can kind of see how your speed is a tiny bit less when you're mid-air as opposed to running. So that's kind of like a way that we visualize speed. Not super useful for you folks. Probably the most important thing in this debug stats list for you is that GRV measure below speed. That's your gravity value. So that gravity is a multiplier. So it is a multiplier that affects the rate at which you fall. So when gravity is 1.00, that means that's like your gravity times 1. So your gravity value is normal. When you jump, your gravity goes to 0.30. So the way that and you can use this to help determine what your gravity state is, which is very important for doing certain tricks. So if I take the general jump, like arc of a jump, for example, I go from 1.0 when I'm on the ground to 3.0, and then once I start falling after reaching the apex of my jump, I hit 0.35. And I'll go over this a bit more once we start messing with the speed tech a bit. But some of the way that the speed tech behaves is based on your stored gravity value. And you can actually, when you're on the ground, change that by jumping and then grabbing a ledge. So you can now see that my gravity is stuck at a 0.30. And that can be really important for, say, oh, well, if I'm doing a mega jump, for example, one of the speed tech that I'll show you, and you're like confused as to why you're not getting the height you need, it takes you at a different height depending on your gravity value. So at like 3.0, for example, it'll send you really high, right? But when I jump and then land on the ground, and then I do a mega jump, it's not as high, right? So that gravity value is probably like the most important feature in this set here. That yellow a bit at the bottom, YVEL, that stands for your Y velocity. So that can be kind of useful for determining the angle of a ledge fly that you're getting. So if I do a ledge fly like that, It can kind of give you some information about that. That's kind of hard to like sort of translate into the angle that you get though, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. That's mostly for people like myself and Monster to mess with. But yeah, but when you're actually practicing, for the most part, I recommend actually disable showing coordinates or pretty much any of these. Generally speaking, the more text that you put on the screen, the more likely the game is to have problems with it, especially on slower PS2 models. If you have too much text on your screen, as it mentions here, it can crash the game. So be careful. It doesn't happen very often, especially when you're doing like some of the strats for any percent, but I wouldn't keep it on all the time if you don't need it. It can just be really helpful in certain scenarios. Okay, so zone map. This one's kind of interesting. I'm going to go ahead and load a file because we're not going to be really able to get any good information out of... we'll go back to Bogshot for this one to show you what this one does. This feature is really, really cool. I'm really excited to show you this. So what the zone map is when you load the zone map, it will load in a map of the area that you're currently in with some extra features on it. So I'm gonna hit zone map, and you're gonna see some kind of this default map real quick, and now you're gonna see this overlay. So what you're seeing here is Bogshot Swamp, but from an aerial perspective, with a whole bunch of different features for us here. So let's go over the controls here. This might take me a second to remember because I haven't had to whip this out in a second. But you can use the D-pad in order to translate the map, so you can move it from left to right. It takes a little bit in order to, because it's basically redrawing the map every time you translate it. And then I believe square scales the map. So yeah, so square is going to zoom out the map, and then circle will zoom in the map, just like that. So you can use circle and square to zoom in and out the map respectively. And then again, you can use the D-pad to translate the map's position left and right. Okay, so what are these things on the map, and what are they telling you? Okay, so the green areas are what's called the exterior. So when we were talking about the loading areas, that's what all of this geometry is. This is part of the exterior of Bogshot Swamp. So all of this green area is considered like part of like the geometry and like the collision of the area, right? So you can also kind of like see it sort of like rendered in a 3D way. So you can see that square is where I'm standing on in the middle of Bogshot Swamp. And these lines that you see, those are like loading triggers. So if you cross over one of those, that's what causes to... So like different parts of the map are broken up into different chunks. And the game tries to not have them loaded all at the same time to save on resources. So when you cross over one of these lines, that tells you when the game's going to start loading in a bit different area of the map. That red area, so I'll translate over to it, that red area over there is what's called a transition. So those were some of those red areas that were mentioned in the area loading code, or area loading hack. So landing on those bits of geometry, the red bits, is what will cause new exteriors to start loading in and sort of transition and change like what areas are being loaded in a given set of coordinates. So if you're navigating out of bounds, this is probably where this tool is the most helpful, because it can give you an idea of where various loading triggers are when you're like super far out of bounds and you can't really get a good idea of everything because of the camera or something like that. You'll see me use this when we start talking about the Kogam steps out of bounds, and we use that to get to the abandoned mines early on in the speedrun. I'll be opening this map so I can show you which way you want to move your character so that you can avoid certain loading triggers to avoid basically falling into a river and dying. So this can also be really, really helpful if you ever decide to learn all bosses. I use this a lot when I practice the entry sequence to where loot burrows when I go to fight the boss. That's another really great place to use it. But it can also be really nice for testing and just messing with stuff, and it's really kind of cool. So that's kind of what this functionality does. If you have more questions about how this bit specifically works, Monster is a pretty good person to ask about it, and is really good at explaining the whole like interior exterior transition loading triggers type thing. He basically studied the whole thing on his own. So come check out our Discord and just ask Monster. He'll probably be able to give you the best amount of information, since he's the one who's studied it the most. But you just press triangle and it closes out of the map. Okay. So the last thing in here, and probably the biggest reason why you should even install this in the first place, is the save game button right here. Now, if you've played this game before, you know that you normally need to, in order to save, you need one of these save points. And then it brings up the save game dialog, right? But if I, for example, load, what was it, 95? If I, for example, go back to that debug level right here, you'll see that there is no save point. So what I can actually do is with the hack menu, I can save game here. And then, boom. So I have a save here now. So basically whenever I want to, I can just warp back into this debug area without having to load it through the load area hack, which is really, really convenient. Now, one of the things I kind of already mentioned is that through the hack pack, it opens up an additional, so in vanilla Neopets, you only get 4 saves. In the hack pack, you get another 99 pages of saves, and you can just do whatever you want with. You're probably never going to need this many, but the big up to having this practice tool is that you can create as many practice saves as you want. Now, if you're playing this on emulator and you're just kind of messing around on emulator, you won't really make as much use of this feature because you have save states. But for console players, this is a huge deal. So I'll give you one example. Let me load my my Draken Ridge save file, for example. Excuse me. So the big reason, like, why this is so much better than just making vanilla practice saves is that when you save using the hack pack, the hack pack keeps in mind the XYZ position of where you saved. So it normally does that anyway for the save points. But let's say, for example, I'm going to take it down where you'll see this area later in the tutorial. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that I am going to be practicing the strat for the walking inside the water glitch. So let's see if I can hit it. Oh, I missed it. But let's say I'm going to practice this right here. So this is the spot you normally want to stand when you're doing it. So what you can do is you can go into the hack menu and create it and hit save game, and then go like to another page. I'll go over to I don't want to save one of my where loop ones. Yeah, this one can go. No. Yeah, black key grounds can go. So I can go ahead and save this, and let's say I perform the trick. So that should work. And I'll just like move a bit further out of bounds, just for example, right? Right. So what I can do is if I load that save, I will actually load back into where I created the manual save rather than being loaded at like the nearest save point. So what you can do is kind of create like a workflow with this where you create save points in front of like places where you do tricks and strats and stuff. And this will allow you to save a bunch of time. So rather than instead of, if you wanted to practice this trick and having to save at that Draken Ridge save point, you can just save right here and you can just go straight for the trick. Right? Just like that. That was a sick unbuffered. So save game anywhere, that's probably the biggest reason that you should use the hack pack. That's the biggest thing that I get out of it. And I think it's the thing that is most applicable to, you know, especially new players. Because practicing things in this game with only 4 save files can be kind of tricky. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I hope that was comprehensive and wasn't too confusing. If you have any more questions about the hack pack, or if you are curious as to like if there's any more features or things that we could implement, feel free to let me know. If any updates change, I will recreate this video with all basically from scratch with all of the new changes. But the link for the download I have in the previous video to this, where I show you all how to get this installed and set up. So go check that out. Thank you all so much for watching, and then next video I will show you the start of the run. So we'll get right into speedrunning this game. Alright, thank you so much everybody. Take it easy.